guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I'm going to be talking about some of my favourite books that are not sci-fi or fantasy. So we talk a great deal about fantasy on this channel and also it's about science fiction as well. I read quite a bit of sci-fi and dystopian. I would say that fantasy, sci-fi and dystopian do account for a good 60-70% of my reading in a year. But I do like to read outside of those genres. I know that you guys will probably know me most as a fantasy booktuber, but I don't believe that I ever have solely fantasy on my TBR every single month. As fantasy and sci-fi are my favourite genres, I'm a little bit less likely to rate books outside of those genres highly just because they don't contain the elements that I love the most in books because they're not my favourite genres. However, that being said, there are some books that I absolutely love that do not contain fantastical or science fiction elements, and I'm going to be talking about those today. So the first book I want to talk about today does have a tiny science fiction element in it. However, it is definitely not the focus of the book, and the story is definitely more about the contemporary elements in it, and that is Orange by Ichigo Takano. This is a manga series. This is the first volume of the complete collection, so it is quite chunky. It has multiple smaller volumes in here. This is a young adult contemporary manga and it follows a girl called Naho who on the first day of 11th grade receives a letter from her future self. That letter says that if she does not change some things about what is going to occur in the next few months, a boy who has just transferred into her class will not be with them at the end of that period. First off, trigger warnings for depression and suicide in here. It does deal with some heavy topics. One of the reasons that some people don't like this book is because the way that mental health is portrayed in here is not the best. It kind of implies that the responsibility for mental health is placed on those around you as opposed to placed on yourself to improve your own mental health. However, this is told from an Eastern perspective as opposed to a Western perspective, and different cultures across the world do view mental health differently. It is actually quite progressive for a manga series to talk about mental health in such detail. I am by no means an expert on Eastern or Japanese culture. However, I have looked into some Own Voices reviews of this series and done a little bit of research, and that is where I have gained this information. I personally really love this series because of the contemporary elements in here. This book focuses a lot on friendship, and yes, we do have a little bit of that negative portrayal of mental health in here, but just how this friendship group works, because we don't just follow Naho in here, we also follow her 4 other friends as well as this new boy who transfers, and just the way that they treat each other, the different dynamics in their friendship group, the different personalities of the characters. I really enjoy all of the characters in here. There's a little bit of comedy as well. Some of the characters are quite funny and are also inserted into here for comedic relief, but pretty much just the way that this friendship dynamic works and the way that they all care about each other and what they will do for each other just really warms my heart. I'm not really one for cute contemporary stories, but when I read manga, that is actually the kind of story I prefer, and yeah, this was just really cute despite dealing with those heavy topics, and the characters in here just really made this for me. The second one I have is You by Caroline Kepnes. This was actually my favourite book of 2019, which was a surprise to everyone. If you guys are looking for more books that aren't fantasy that I recommend, I would recommend checking out that video because it was a very surprising list last year. There was not a whole ton of fantasy on there at all, and everybody, including myself, was shocked. So this is an adult thriller. It's also a little bit of a character study because we are in the mind of a man called Joe. This book is told in second person perspective, so we are literally in the mind of Joe as he is stalking a girl who walked into the bookstore where he worked one day. He quickly became infatuated with her and decided that she would be his, he would have her, and it is how he goes about that. So the thing that I really enjoyed about this story is that it makes you think. It's written almost in a romance kind of way because you are in the mind of Joe, so you know everything that he is thinking and everything that he is feeling. You obviously know that he is a stalker because that is the premise of this book, that is what it's about. So you know that he is the bad guy in this situation. However, the way that it's written, it makes Joe seem quite rational in times. I think it also captures the obsessive nature that some people can have when they enter into a new relationship. It's a very teenage feeling, I want to say. So when you like somebody and you become, I don't want to say obsessed with them, but everything you do starts to become about them. Like, how can I make this person notice me? This person likes this thing, so I'm going to take an interest in it as well, and things like that. So some of the things in here are are quite relatable, they're quite rational. You have been in places where you have felt what Joe has felt. However, I'm assuming you have gone about it in a much more healthy, productive and reasonable manner than going out and stalking somebody. I do really think that the way that this book is written is quite masterful for you to identify with and sympathize with a stalker, because when you are reading this, you are firmly on Joe's side. You even start to villainize the girl that she is stalking, because she is not a perfect person, and the thing that she's doing that is hurting the main character, who is Joe, who you are while you're reading this book, it's frustrating, it's annoying, and you kind of get where he's coming from. That being said, underneath all this, Joe is a stalker, and that is quite obvious, but I think it's a good book to kind of test your own morality, to see how you feel about it, and then you also have this internal battle of sympathizing with Joe, liking Joe. I really like Joe, but at the same time you know that he's a bad person, and that inner battle of morality I really love. Next up we have a classic, not an actual classic, but a classic in terms of everybody loves this book, and that is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. I do want to reread this at some point because I do really love it. This is the first book that I ever read and logged onto Goodreads, so I think I read it in around 2014. In this book you follow Charlie, who is a freshman at high school, and he is a wallflower. He's pretty much counting down the days till he can leave school. He's never really fit in anywhere, and he spends most of his time watching the people around him as opposed to actively participating. This book is also kind of told in letter format. It reads like a normal book, but it is addressed to somebody who Charlie refers to as a dear friend at the start of his letters, and he's just talking about his time in high school as he learns to stop being a wallflower and actually participate, and how this makes him feel, how it changes him as a person, how he feels about the people around him. We have some very dynamic, very lovable characters in here. There are trigger warnings for mental health in here. There's a whole bunch of stuff, but I would say that PTSD and trauma flashbacks do play a big part in this book, but I just think that it was a beautifully told story, and this book will stay with me for a very long time. I also really love the movie. The movie is one of my favorites of all time. It has an excellent cast and an excellent soundtrack. So yeah, if you haven't picked up The Perks of Being a Wallflower yet, then I definitely would recommend it. It is kind of, I want to say a booktube staple, but the influence of this book does expand wider than booktube, and it is also an extremely good book. Next up we have one that I've read more recently, and that is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. Earlier this year I started to feel slumpy, and whenever I feel slumpy I read Colleen Hoover. The reason for this is that she typically writes very angsty, very over dramatic, sometimes a little bit problematic young adult and new adult romances. So I don't really look at the synopses of her books when I'm going into them. I just pick up whichever ones I have lying around. Like I picked this one up secondhand just because it was written by Colleen Hoover, or I head over to Scribd and just read a random one of her books. So when I picked up It Ends With Us, I expected it to be a new adult romance that had all of that angsty drama, problematic stuff I really like to read about when I'm trying to get out of a reading slump. However, this book is not that. You will see throughout this video especially actually that I really love books with grey morality in a real world setting as well as in fantasy settings, and I love seeing the nuance and complexity of situations that people often think would be clear cut. So in this story we follow a girl called Lily, and this book starts off where her father has just died and she has headed up to the roof of a tall building just to think about some things. In enters Ryle, who I believe is a neurosurgeon, and he has just finished a particularly hard day at work, so he has come up to the roof to blow off steam. Him and Lily decide that they are going to have no string sex because Ryle doesn't really believe in relationships, and just when that is about to happen, Ryle receives a call and he has to go back to work to perform an emergency surgery. A few months pass and they have no contact until one day randomly they meet again, and a lot of this book is a romance between Lily and Ryle. However, this book is told in a dual timeline, and the secondary timeline is of when Lily is a teenager. She's reading back her diaries from her teenage years, and the elements that it focuses on in that timeline is a homeless boy that Lily knew when she was a teenager that she decided to look after and help out, as well as her parents' relationship because her father was actually regularly abusing her mother. So trigger warnings for domestic violence in here. There is a lot of talk about it. It is a strong theme throughout this book, but I can't really talk about this book and the things that happen in it, but just the way that this is written, it's similar to you, how you are in the perspective of Lily, so you experience everything that she is experiencing in this book, and it hurt. This book really hurt me because Lily has to make difficult decisions in this book, and because of the way that this is written, it is written as one type of story when it is actually a very different type of story. And because you are in the mind of Lily, you pretty much are Lily for the ride of this book. So as she has to make difficult decisions, as things start to happen to her that she has to deal with, you as a reader feel like you are also experiencing this and having to process this with her, and you start to see the complexity and the nuance of the situation that Lily has ended up in, which is a situation that women often find themselves in the real world. I really loved that this book put me in that position and made me think about women in that position, because I'm not a woman in that position, this ambiguous position that I can't tell you that Lily's in. But yeah, I would definitely recommend that you check this book out. It really hurt me and made me think about a whole lot of stuff, but please make sure that you will not be affected by the trigger warnings if you do choose to read this book. The other two books that I would like to talk about in this video I do not own. The first one of those being a booktube classic, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, I have wanted to read Taylor Jenkins Reid for quite some time, especially her older books, because she tends to write unrealistic romance stories like Colleen Hoover does, and those books are exactly what I need to get me out of a reading slump. So I decided to pick up The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo in probably 2017 when everybody was talking about it, and I really loved it. This book for me lived up to the hype of pretty much what everybody says about it. If you are somehow unfamiliar with this book, we have two characters in here. One of them is Monique, who is a journalist. She's not gotten very far in her career. She wants to proceed further, but she's just not advancing as she would like to. And one day, the aging starlet Evelyn Hugo asks Monique to write her life story. Everybody has wanted to know Evelyn Hugo's story for the longest time. She was an actress in old Hollywood. I think this book starts in like the 40s or 50s, and it comes all the way up to present day. And Evelyn has been quite a private person in a lot of ways, and people want to know what her life is really like, especially which of the seven husbands that she had did she love the most, which one is her true love. So Evelyn decides that she's going to tell this story to Monique, and Monique has no idea why, because she's not very successful in her career. However, that does become relevant in the book, like why she has specifically chosen this journalist to tell her story. This book has LGBTQ+ rep in it, which was really great to see, especially in the setting and time period of this story. Evelyn Hugo is a woman with so much agency. I know some people don't like her, they think that she's selfish and rude, but she is pretty much somebody who knows what she wants in life. There's also POC rep in here because Evelyn is Cuban, and she started off in a rough spot in life, and she did everything that she possibly could, no matter who it affected, no matter what the consequences, to get to a better position in life, a life where she assumed that she could be happy and where she became this very successful actress. The thing that I really loved about this, like the main thing that I loved about this book, is the same thing that everybody says about it, and it is that Taylor Jenkins Reid writing makes Evelyn seem like a real person. When you have finished this book, you feel like you have read a book that is about a real Hollywood actress, and that if you went and looked it up, you could find documentaries on the subject, and you could watch some films that Evelyn Hugo has been in. However, that is not the case. Evelyn Hugo is very fictional, but I really love the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid made her come alive from the page and made her seem like a very real person. The final book I would like to talk about in this video is the one with the most questionable morality. It is a book that I absolutely adored for the same reasons that I love you and that I love you. Yeah, okay. For the same reasons that I love you, and for the same reasons that I love It Ends With Us, and that is All the Ugly and Wonderful Things by Bryn Greenwood. Now, this has a very sketchy sounding synopsis. This book follows two characters, one of which is a very young girl. I believe she's 8 at the start of this novel, and she lives with her parents. Her mother is addicted to drugs and her father is a drug dealer. I don't want to say he's like a gang lord or anything because it's quite small time. It's set somewhere in the US countryside. She also has a little brother, and at 8 years old she is expected to take care of her little brother because a lot of the time her father isn't around and her mother is incapable. So this little girl has a very very rough life. And when somebody who works for her father, who is 23 years old, comes in and starts to actually take care of her in a way that nobody ever has, he makes sure that she eats, he makes sure that she actually gets to school, he takes away some of the responsibilities that she has looking after her little brother so that she doesn't have to have that pressure as a child, and naturally she becomes quite attached to him to the point where they eventually start a romantic relationship. So yes, this is a book that contains paedophilia. The thing that I really love about this book is that, like with some of the other books I've mentioned in this video, it puts you in the position of a character that I hope none of you guys, and that I certainly haven't, but I hope that none of you guys have also ever had to be in the position of this little girl, because her life is absolutely awful. And what Bryn Greenwood does is she puts you into the perspective of a character who has absolutely nothing good in her life, and she illustrates how for some people in the world, the things that most of us would assume are terrible and the things that most of us would frown upon and not approve of are sometimes the only good things that somebody has in their life. So yes, this is a story that contains paedophilia, and it has a extremely taboo and illegal romantic relationship in it, but it is also a story about hope. So it really makes you think, which is what I loved about it. It puts you in a incredibly complicated and nuanced situation, and while it's not written in a way that supports this romantic relationship, it kind of just gives you the facts and lets you make up your own mind on what is going on here. And no, I in no way approve of the relationship that is going on in this book, but I do think that it is a very unique perspective. I think that the book is well crafted, and overall my take from reading that book is that it is a story about hope. So those were 6 of my favorite books that are not fantasy. Please let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. Please also, if you can, recommend me books that are like All the Ugly and Wonderful Things, It Ends With Us and You, that put you into the perspective of a character that kind of makes you question your own morality and also really think about the complexity and nuance of some people's life circumstances. Because as you can tell, I didn't even notice until I started filming this video and was actually talking about the books. I didn't notice that those things were a recurring theme through this video, but it turns out that that is something that I really like in books. So if you guys have any recommendations, then please let me know down below. But that is about it for this video, guys. So please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.